Before we begin today's video, I wish to thank every single one of my subscribers for all their great support towards this channel. If it wasn't for you, this entire channel would be nothing. I also wish to thank Code.ag for the great background music that he allows me to use on all of my videos. Link to his channel will be in the description. Also, a huge thanks to the Tribute Girl for making a tribute video for my channel. Link to her channel will be in the description as well. In honor of 100 subscribers for today's last episode of the True Scary Stories, I have decided to do a 30-minute scary story special. Again, a big thank you to all. The following are based on true events, according to their authors. Like most people these days, I had a very bad childhood. Who doesn't, right? My father took off before I was born, and my mother was left to care for me on her own, a skill she was sorely lacking. My mother slipped right back into the drug-addled party lifestyle she'd enjoyed before I was born, and had soon turned our 2-bedroom apartment into an opium den. For the first 5 years of my life, I walked around in a confused, terrifying mist. The smoky air would flood down the hallway from our living room and slip under my bedroom door. It always seemed to linger for days. I know now that my mother wasn't a bad person, just a victim of her addictions. When she did have spare money, she would put food in the house or buy me clothes from Goodwill. The only piece of furniture I had in my bedroom was a mattress set and a little blue and white toy chest. Not that I had a lot of toys to put in it, of course, just the 3 I had gotten for my birthdays. One was an art kit, one was a red wagon, and the last, my pride and joy, was a doll named Betsy. Betsy was my best friend. We would have imaginary tea parties together, sleep together, and even take baths together. Sometimes I even remember her voice. When I thought back on my conversations with the doll in adulthood, I realized that I was likely suffering from delusions, thanks to the always present butts of smoke that laid claim to the dingy hallways and drafty bedrooms of our small apartment. Still, I remember the sound of her voice, a pleasant, tingling lilt that was almost always coupled with a raucous giggle. I also remember the things that she said to me and the things she wanted me to do. She asked me to steal usual foods or pens and pencils. She wanted me to bring her forks and knives and hit the bad man who slept on our couch. It was always something, and I would always get in trouble, but she wouldn't. When I told my mother, who had put me up to these games, she would scoff and shake her head. She never believed me. Adults never do. Around my 6th birthday, I asked my mother for a birthday party. I wanted to invite the mean girls from school and serve them cake and ice cream to make them like me. I remember standing in the kitchen that day with such hopes, having just asked the most important question of my entire life. The glass bottle of Coca-Cola I held was shaking in my nervous hands. I waited with a bated breath as my mother continued putting groceries away, almost as if she hadn't heard me, but I knew she had. Finally, just as I had failed a second time to muster the courage to repeat my question, she turned around and gave me a flippant shake of her head. A birthday party, Laura? That's ridiculous. I can't afford to feed 15 children that aren't even mine. Hell, I can barely afford to feed you. You eat like an elephant, especially for a girl your size. Or I'm sorry, Betsy does. That's barely anything left for me to eat around here, much less a classroom of other people's brats. My face fell as she shook her head, mumbled something else under her breath, and stumbled off into the living room. I heard the music go up then as more people walked in the door. Some left, some stayed. I never knew them either way. It simply wasn't fair. My mom threw parties all the time. What about me? I was a kid. All my friends had birthday parties, and now the mean girls at school would know I was too poor to have one, and they would tease me even more. I felt tears start to well in the corner of my eyes, and I choked back the sob while I ran to my room and slammed the door behind me. Betsy was lying on the bed and smiling. She was always smiling. Usually it made me feel better, but today it just made me angry. She just kept staring at me and smiling. She was going to tell me to do something bad again. this was why Mother wouldn't throw me a birthday party. It was because of all the trouble I got into because of her. This was her fault. Betsy didn't have to go to school, and Betsy never got in trouble like I did. And in my young mind, I truly believed it was the doll, not my mother, who was to blame for everything. I snapped then. I screamed in indignant rage, and I threw the bottle as hard as I could at the bed. It hit Betsy on her forehead, and she fell on the floor. Good. I picked up the bottle and hit her again and again. I thought I heard her laugh and hit her harder. Then I laughed. When my rage was spent, I dragged Betsy to my toy chest and threw her in. I slammed it shut and kicked the chest against the wall. I never wanted to see Betsy again. Ever. I never owned another doll after Betsy. And about a week later, the police came and two nice ladies took me to live in a new home, in a new state, with food and toys and no drugs. The trunk went into storage and the wagon disappeared. I never saw my mom again. And as I got older, my foster parents admitted she was in jail doing 25 years. That was fine with me. I felt nothing for her anyway. I still had nightmares because of my life with that woman. But then slowly, I began to heal. I focused on doing well in school, and I ignored my mom's letters from prison. She reached out to me several times in my 20s as well, but I always declined her calls. That is until this morning. I'm 30 now, with my own children and a loving, honest husband. I have a beautiful house, 2 dogs, and a career as a social worker, trying to make a difference for kids who had it bad like me. I'm happy, I'm steady, and I'm content. So, when I got a voicemail from my mom informing me she had been paroled and that she wished to speak, decided to let her say her piece. Since the kids were home from school, I went out into our shed in the backyard to return my mother's call. The shed was the children's domain and they used it to play in the summer. I sat on my old chest, which was currently being used as a tea party table, and dialed the number she had left me. There were 3 rings. Hello, Laura? Hello, Mother, how are you? Oh, Laura, thank you for speaking to me. I know you have your own life now and a family, but I would love to meet someday. I just wanted to tell you how sorry I am for everything. Mother, you are not meeting my kids, ever. And since you called me, I'm going to say what I have needed to say for years. The opium, the heroin, they destroyed you. And the worst of it is that you almost took me down with you. I was 5. That was no home for a child. Honestly, I'm surprised it took you so long to get caught. Laura, I know how it seems, but I honestly know nothing. Look, it hardly matters, and I do understand why you would feel that way. Why would you hate me and not want me to meet your little ones? I learned a lot about forgiveness while I was away, and just... Oh, Laura, I'm so sorry about Betsy. Betsy? I paused, confused. Why would you care about her? I know, Laura, believe me, I do. It was all my fault. The drugs, the partying, and Betsy. Oh God, if I had only paid attention, if I had only known. She's gone, and it's because of me. As my mother began to cry, I tapped my fingers on the toy box impatiently. The drugs had clearly fried her brain. Mother, I sighed, why are you talking about Betsy? And why do you even care? I know where Betsy is, right underneath me. What are you talking about, Laura? Oh God, where is she? I shifted uncomfortably. Well, Betsy's in the trunk, where she's always been. There was a beat of stunning silence. What do you mean? Your sister's in the trunk? Sister? What the hell are you talking about? Back on drugs so soon? That's a record even for you. Betsy's a goddamn doll. I locked her in my toy box a few days before you got arrested for possession. Laura. Oh God, no, Laura, what have you done? I wasn't arrested because of the drugs, Laura. I was arrested because of Betsy's disappearance. You always called her your little doll, but we thought you knew. Oh God, we thought you knew. Laura, no. What have you done to my baby? My mind had gone blank, and with no emotion, I set the phone down next to me and stood up. I could hear the muffled sound of my mother's anguished cries and feel the dark clutch of possibility in my own chest. Memories were stirring in the back of my mind, threatening to flood forward into my consciousness. They pushed against the door in my mind that had been locked so tightly for so long that I had forgotten it was even there. Was it even possible? Could the trauma and the opium have really led me to believe that a small child was actually a doll, begging for food and utensils to eat with, asking me to protect her from the bad man? No. I slowly turned around and brought my eyes down the makeshift tea party table. Surely it was too small. You couldn't fit a person in there. You just couldn't. But then, what about a very small, starving, emaciated child? What about her? Would she fit? Would an investigator even bother looking for a person in this chest? I knew I wouldn't. It was just too small. And I was sure we had opened the toy box at some point over the years, hadn't we? Or had something swimming in the dark recesses of my memories always stopped me? I couldn't remember ever seeing it open. I knelt down to the ground and opened the clasps. It would be better to not look. After all that I had overcome, this new life that I had earned for myself, it could all be undone by opening this toy box. I shouldn't open it. I should throw it in a landfill and forget it ever existed. I should not look inside. I opened the chest. I never had a doll. My mother never could afford to buy me one. I never had a wagon either, for that matter. But I did have a toy box, a pretty blue and white toy box. And when I was 5, I beat my little sister to death and put her in it. Last year, during my senior year of college, I lived with a couple of roommates in a house in the oldest section of the town. Our landlord told us that the house had always been in the family since it was built in the 1860s. Aside from that, we didn't really know much about the history of it. It was a creaky and rickety old house with an especially creepy basement that featured the laundry machines and an unused coal room. Some strange things happened in that house in the fall. We began to have a lot of electrical issues. The power would randomly go out for a few minutes before switching back on by itself. The oddest thing about these power outages was that they only seemed to happen at night. I can't recall a single time the power shut off during the day. My roommates and I simply associated the issues with the age of the house. One evening, while I was doing my laundry, I noticed something odd. The door to the coal room was shut. We normally had it propped open, so I went to inspect it and I found that it was locked. I called my roommates down and we determined it was locked from the inside. They all laughed it off, but I felt rather unsettled. About a week later, I was home alone watching House of Cards in my room. My roommates were all at the library together. I declined to join since I didn't have much work to do. Suddenly, the TV flickered and the power went out. The house went silent. I turned my phone's flashlight on and prepared to go into the basement in order to flip the breakers. As I closed near the basement door, I distinctly heard the sound of footsteps coming up creaky stairs. I'll never forget the sound, menacing and methodical. Clunk, clunk, clunk. I got the hell out of there. I ran to my car and raced out of there to my girlfriend's house for the night. The next day, I told my roommates about what had happened. They didn't seem to believe me, but agreed to come check out the basement with me. When we made it down the stairs, we made an extremely unsettling discovery. The coal room door was wide open, and the lock, it was broken. When I was a young teen, about 15 I think, I had a slumber party with some friends on my birthday. We did all the usual slumber party type things, including creepy games like light as a feather, stiff as a board, and playing with a Ouija board. Now, let me preface this by saying that I had requested and gotten the Ouija board for Christmas and never thought of it as anything more than a cool creepy game. We were living in Hawaii, and there is a very strong sense of mana on the islands, a spiritual quality that allows for supernatural happenings. There are ghost stories, aplenty, so I naturally believe in ghosts and was going through a phase where I was devouring books by Stephen King and reading about ghosts and possessions and all manner of things that I being a highly imaginative, creative young woman, probably should not have been so eager to read about. Anyway, we got out the Ouija board, turned off the lights, put our fingers on the planchette, and started asking questions. We were asking all the usual questions. Is there anyone here with us? Are you a boy or a girl? What's your name? Etc, etc. I admit I was influencing where the planchette was going. It was my party, my birthday, and I could mess with their heads if I wanted to, damn it. So I was pushing and pulling it a bit here and there. Pretty harmless stuff. But gradually, I felt it pushing and pulling against me. So I thought someone else was trying to take over. So I let them. We kept asking dumb questions, getting dumb answers. Then it stopped moving for a moment. I got back in there, giving it a little shove, and got the game started again. Pretty soon I was fighting against one of the other girls, again, so I stopped trying to control it for a second time. Then someone asked if it was actually a ghost talking to us, and the planchette slid over the word, no. Someone asked, are you good? The planchette moved away, then back to no. Are you bad? It slid to yes. We all started getting nervous at that point. Could you hurt someone if you tried? Away, then back to yes. At this point, I wanted to kill the stupid girl who kept asking questions. I knew she was the one messing with the planchette. Why would you do that? It slid all over the place, finally spelling can. Yep, I was just about done. We were all about done when someone else asked, what's your name? For God's sake, my friends did not know when to just shut up. The planchette started sliding around again. D, E, V. Now I was done. I jumped up, turned on the lights and said, that's it, no more. I took the board, packed it all up and shoved the thing onto the top shelf of the second closet. My room had 2 closets. One I used. The other had things like coats and boxes in it. The whole family used it. The rest of the night was spent with us alternating between screaming at every little noise and then giggling about it. But this isn't a story about a sleepover and stupid Ouija board game. This is a story about what happened afterwards. I started hearing tapping sounds from the closet. Little ones, kind of quiet, but there. Tap, 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 tap. Not every night either, just sometimes. I would go weeks without hearing anything, then suddenly one night after another, tap, 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 tap. I started jumping out of bed and running from the room whenever it started up, and my mom caught me sleeping on the couch several times. There were nights I would drag her or my sister into the room to try and make them hear it too, but the sounds would stop the moment someone else came in. Then one night, one glorious night, my mom made it into the room in time to hear the tapping. She was dumbfounded that I had actually been hearing something this whole time. She was also braver than I, because she promptly opened the closet to identify where the sound was coming from. The sound stopped in mid-tap, but not before we both realized it was coming from the Ouija board box. I just had a meltdown when I came to the realization that the planchette was moving and tapping on the inside of the box. I'm not clear on what exactly happened after that, but my mom says I became hysterical and wouldn't calm down until she took the box out of the closet, out of my room, and out of the apartment. She had to lock it in the trunk of the car. She took it to a swap meet to get rid of it, but when a woman picked it up and asked if it really worked, she said, "My daughter says it works too well. That's why I'm trying to sell it." The woman put it down and walked away. No one would buy it because my mom was a really honest woman and still is, and would tell the truth whenever anyone asked her about it. I love my mother, but geez. I refused to have it back in my apartment, so she ended up stopping at one of those Goodwill bins and putting it in there. I used to wonder what happened to it and hoped that it got beat up and damaged and eventually burned up in a fire somewhere else. I stopped hearing tapping noises. I had other experiences over the years, but this one, well, I will never forget it. When I was in high school, my friends and I had a peculiar pastime. Like any teenage delinquent, we liked to cause trouble. We weren't vandals, we didn't deal drugs, and we certainly didn't bully kids in school. No, we liked to scare the living crap out of new parents by hacking their baby monitors. We were insufferable little punks who thought we were too good to get caught and that our little acts of mischief would go unpunished. One night, however, I learned my lesson and I realized that I wasn't quite as bulletproof as my tremendous adolescent ego made me out to be. Dimitri, Kurt, and I went to the same school, shared many of the same classes, and hung out almost every evening after chow time. We watched prank shows, played video games, talked about who had the nicest rack in school. One evening, we were trading scary stories at the park. Kurt shared the classic story about the single mother who heard a haunting voice on her baby monitor. Like most horror stories, it sounded like a total bullshit, but Dimitri told us it had happened to his mom once. On her own monitor, she'd heard a neighbor singing to her baby. Apparently, it was possible to accidentally tap into someone else's frequency. In an instant, a light bulb turned on in each one of our heads. When you're close enough to someone, you don't need words to know what the person is thinking, and we could all tell we were thinking the exact same thing. We were going to buy a baby monitor and screw with people. Pardon the pun, but hacking a baby monitor is a child's play. All you need to do is find a device on the same frequency as yours. So I went ahead and purchased a high-end monitor with a frequency dial so we could prank as many targets as possible. The following night, we took to our bikes, roamed the neighborhood, and found our very first victim. We could see the nursery from the suburban home's second floor window. Dimitri grabbed the baby monitor and began tuning it to different frequencies until we heard breathing. I remember feeling excited as our plan finally came to fruition. Dimitri pressed the button and began exhaling heavily into the receiver. "Your little girl was delicious," he murmured using a demonic voice. The light in the master bedroom turned on almost immediately, and we heard the shrill scream. Laughing our asses off, we quickly rode off down the street so we wouldn't get caught. We repeated the prank several times over the course of the following weeks, each taking turns talking through the monitor. Not wanting anyone to get wise to our little game, we chose different houses every time. People's reactions were priceless. Some mothers would reply in a panic, others seemed to know it was a hoax and told us to shut up, and one poor woman even started sobbing uncontrollably, begging us not to hurt her baby. I feel very bad about the last one now that I'm older, but it was hilarious to me back then. My friends and I mimicked her high-pitched bawling and desperate cries for mercy for weeks afterwards. Yeah, we were royal dicks. Karma's a bitch, and I got what was coming to me one night. Kurt and Dimitri were busy studying for their midterms, so I went out on my own. By then, we'd gotten pretty much everyone in the surrounding area, so I decided to venture off across town and into unfamiliar territory. Finding a target wasn't difficult. You just had to look for cars with baby seats, houses with overly colourful cartoon-themed curtains, or toys left in the yard. I came across a house that fit all three criteria, and parked my bike out of view. Playing with the tuner, I eventually found the right frequency. I could hear the sound of a baby snoring very slightly. A devious little smirk pushed its way onto my lips, and my heart began pounding with excitement. It was my time to shine. "I am watching you," I whispered into the monitor, using the creepiest voice I could muster. The house remained dark and lifeless. I figured the homeowners hadn't heard me. "I stand over your bed, watching, waiting. I will get you," I said louder this time. Again, nothing. Just the sounds of crickets chirping and the occasional dull roar of a car driving down the street. It was a little odd. Parents usually reacted much quicker than that. I began feeling a little nervous and somewhat exposed. You know, like when you suddenly realize some creeper's gawking at you. It was getting late and I had a long bike ride home. Just as I was about to give up and leave, I heard a strange, moist gurgling sound coming from the monitor. The quiet, rhythmic snore ceased, and I assumed the baby had woken up and was about to start crying. Instead, a man spoke to me. "You're the one being watched now, Juan," he said softly. My stomach pirouetted at his words. How did he know my name? I felt sick. Something was very wrong, and I could feel it in my bones. I glanced up at the nursery window and saw a silhouette standing there, watching me. Had he been there the whole time? The air was thick and difficult to inhale, though perhaps fear was making it hard to breathe. My body quivered uncontrollably, as a sense of dread poured into every inch of me. I climbed on my bike, pedaling desperately to get away. Part of me thought I was overreacting, but the overwhelming need to flee overpowered my rational mind. "You can't run. I know where you live, Juan," continued the man, even as I turned the corner. I flew down the street, not stopping until I reached a busy boulevard. Surrounded by cars and a few late-night joggers, I felt safe. "Your hoodie will run red in your blood," whispered the man, still talking through the baby monitor in my pocket. A passerby gave me a nasty look as I yelped loudly in fear, practically ripping my hoodie in my frantic attempt at removing it. To the stranger, I must have looked like some snotty kid tripping balls or something. He didn't know I was in genuine distress, so I don't blame him for walking off with an insulted huff, though I wish he had offered to help me instead. After stuffing the hoodie into my backpack, I noticed my name scrawled on the back. It was my frickin' school jacket. No wonder that bastard knew my name. It then occurred to me that the baby monitors were fairly short range, so I was obviously being followed. I nervously glanced around to try and identify my stalker. Was it the empty-looking van down the street? That guy walking his dog? The car that had just driven by? Either way, the last thing I wanted was to hear that voice again, so I turned off the device and started pedaling towards my home. Fear had heightened my senses. I began to notice every motion of the trees in the breeze, every crackle of twigs under my wheels, and every car that zipped past me. I flinched whenever anyone came near, paranoid that whoever had spoken to me through the baby monitor was going to catch up. Fortunately though, I made it home without incident. I parked the bike in my garage and crawled up the stairs to my bedroom. In one careless motion, I tossed my backpack and the baby monitor in the corner of my room and dove under my sheets like an Olympic swimmer. It doesn't matter how old you are, nothing feels safer than being under your blanket. I closed my eyes, hoping I'd be able to calm down enough to catch a few hours of rest before class, but then I heard static coming from the monitor across the room. The monitor was supposed to be off. "Sweet dreams, Juan," said the voice that still haunts my nightmares. I didn't sleep a wink that night. I was too frightened to get out of bed until sunrise. When I got up, my first order of business was to remove the battery from the monitor and throw it in the trash. I didn't want anything to do with it anymore. I came up with an excuse to give my buddies so that they wouldn't think that I was afraid of anything. With massive bags under my eyes, I got dressed, had breakfast, and went to school. It wasn't until a few days later that I saw the house in the news. In an interview, a police officer explained that the small family who had been living in the house had been found in their beds, necks slit open. I had been outside when it happened. The killer had heard me on the baby monitor and decided just to play around with me. It was definitely a wake-up call, and I thanked my lucky stars that I wasn't murdered that night. I was too busy feeling thankful that I survived to feel bad about the family that hadn't. Empathy, like wisdom, comes with age. Now that I'm an adult, with a wife and a daughter, I truly understand the consequences of my actions and the severity of the situation I put myself in as a tremendously stupid teenage boy. I reached the epitome of fear, but it was just the tip of the iceberg. As a father, I now know that fear thrives and multiplies when there is something more precious than your own life at stake. I can't say for sure whether the killer found me again after all these years, or whether a new breed of idiots had the same idea as my friends and I, but I can tell you that now I understand what true terror is. Last night, I heard something on our baby monitor that sent chills into my very soul, shackling me with a paralyzing fear that I doubt will ever leave me. It said, "I'm still watching." Let me begin by saying that I was not asleep when this happened. I was very much awake. It was a school night, and I was off to bed. There was a rocking chair by the door in my room. These were to my right, only about 3 or 4 feet away. I began to drift into sleep when suddenly I felt a presence in the room with me. I have always been very sensitive to things like that. I looked over to the rocking chair on my right, and what I saw was absolutely horrible. An older woman with an extremely pale face. Her hair was grey. It was pulled back very tightly into a bun. She was dressed in old clothing like from the Civil War times. Her dress was long-sleeved and had buttons all the way down the arm on the side. It also entirely covered her neck, and the buttons there started at the top, going straight down. But the horrific thing about her was that where her eyes and mouth should have been, there was only darkness. Just pure black spots, black holes against that sheet white face. She was rocking very fast in the chair, as if she were anxious. I somehow knew that she was waiting on some very important information. I felt like she was expecting something from her son. Suddenly, she realized that I could see her, and in a split second, she was on top of me, strangling me. All I could do was look into these dark holes. I was paralyzed and absolutely terrified. This seemed to go on forever, and I constantly folded, though there was nothing I could do. Then, after what seemed like an eternity, she disappeared. I quickly ran out of the room, through the kitchen, through the living room, and straight to the bathroom where my stepmother was. I never saw that woman again after that night, but from then on, I was very afraid every night. I will never forget that face. Here's a drawing of how she looked like.